So good morning, everyone. Happy Mother's Day to those mothers out there that are taking part in the service today. It is good to be with you. For those of you that are here in New Hampshire with us, how about that snow yesterday? May 9th, and it's still snowing. Yes, things are off a little bit this year. But one thing we want to let you know that is on, thanks to Kyle, that you can't see him today, but we want to say thank you to Kyle for his technological expertise. He's been able to give us an upgrade, so we believe that we will be with you all through Facebook Live today. And also to let you know, for those people that have had technological difficulties, that you're welcome to watch things on the church's website. Again, that's swanzeyucc.org, and then you're welcome to look for digital services. So today, we'd like to welcome you to our worship service and begin our actual service, the bringing of our light, the church's one foundation. Hear this, our opening prayer. Ever gracious God, from generation to generation, you call forth faithful women and men to be willing servants of truth. You fill us with strength and hope, yet we find it is often not enough. We pray both for great faith and easy lives, but we know these things seldom exist together. We pray only to avoid the time of trial, when we need also to pray for strength and confidence, to face the challenges that come with faithfulness. Forgive us, Holy One, for our limited vision and our feeble trust. Amen. So let us pass our peace. God makes peace within us. Let us claim it. God makes peace between us. Let us share it. May the peace of God be with you. Now today, we're going to be having a meditation that involves the following scriptures or sacred stories. If you'd like to take a look back at those at another time, you will find those scriptures are Acts 7, verses 55 through 60. In John, the Gospel of John, it'll be chapter 14, verses 1 through 14. And the message today is an entitled Rummage Sale. So over the years, I have tried to draw attention to the large and sweeping changes that have been happening in the church at large, in the culture as well. Presently, COVID-19 certainly has a spotlight, but the spread of the virus reveals some of the inherent strengths and vulnerabilities of the mobility of goods, people, and ideas. Now, I'm not an expert on the topic of sea change. Instead, I am merely trying to point to some of what is actually just taking place. The shift began before our lifetimes, in fact, but its intensity has grown. Even before the days of COVID-19, many felt off, making us cagey, disoriented, anxious. You feel it. I know I do too. I have preached sermons on it, pointing to philosophic and psychological themes like alienation and grandiosity, liminality, and inflation. I have tried to use biblical, literary, and human concepts like the divine child, the grail, and resurrection. I have used words like teleos, development, transformation, and maturity. Heck, I have even tried to use illustrations by sprouting grain, baking bread, and growing wheat. I've done all this and much more, trying to give context and make holy sense of what is taking place. And then I realized I had been using the wrong metaphor. 3 years ago, I finally gave a name, or named the proper metaphor to give this church a broader perspective. I needed to get back to what Jesus was good at, explaining these larger concepts and realities in simple images that people live with and can actually understand. The metaphor was a rummage sale. And I hope this metaphor can help us again as we look at what the possible post-realities of COVID-19 might be. Now, to help us do this, I want us to think of a book. And so over a decade ago, a book came out by Phyllis Tickle entitled The Great Emergence. Tickle gives words to the disruption, upheaval, and change which is occurring in the church and larger Western culture. At the start of the book, she elaborates on an observation made by Bishop Mark Dreyer. Tickle writes, "The only way to understand what is currently happening to us as 21st century Christians in North America is first to understand that about every 500 years, the church feels compelled to hold a giant rummage sale." And he goes on to say, we are living in and through one of those 500-year sales. Now, for those that have done a rummage sale is a lot of work. There's sorting and assessing, there's carrying, and there's marking. It means getting rid of stuff that you no longer need or you want. Space and resources are freed so something new can emerge. It's a time of cleaning house and letting go. We are metaphorically going through a huge rummage sale that is influenced by political, social, economic, scientific, and technological forces. As Tickle writes on page 16, about every 500 years, the empowered structures of institutionalized Christianity, whatever they may be at the time, become an intolerable carapace that must be shattered in order that renewal and new growth may occur. So that's a lot of big language, but think about it just simply as this. You have clothes sometimes, and if you were a small child, as you grow older, you grow out of those clothes. You can't stay in them because they just confine you in certain ways. That's what we're talking about now, is over time, things become rigid. There's ossification that sets in. In other words, things hold you bound in place. And if you really want renewal or growth, you have to be able to break out of those, or you have to let go of the things that no longer make sense or hold you bound. So Tickle traces this 500-year pattern in order to grant understanding and reassurance to all the anxious people living through it. And I want to share more of her work with you so you can start to discern this pattern for yourself. Now, Tickle points to four greats she can identify in Christianity that have happened along this 500-year cycle when the rummage sale takes place. Now, those four greats are the Great Reformation, the Great Schism, Gregory the Great, and the Great Transformation. They occur in the 16th, the 11th, the 6th, and the 1st century. During the 21st century, we are immersed in the Great Emergence. In 2020, we are presently in the midst of the Great Emergence, so we do not yet know the outcome. But we are 503 years out from the Great Reformation, and so it seems that timetable is working. On October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther tacks his 95 Theses on the door of the Catholic Church. This act is seen by many as a spark that unites the Protestant Reformation, dividing the Western Christian world between Catholicism and those protesters believing the church needed to be reformed. In this church, the First Congregational Church of Swanzey is a descendant of this act of protest and reformation. The universal church splinters into these denominations and multiple viewpoints. The Enlightenment, rationalism, and industrialism, or the Industrial Revolution, are some of the broader cultural changes that come about. Now let's go back 500 years prior and find another rummage sale in upheaval, the Great Schism in the 11th century. In 1054, the church divides between West and East, between the Catholic and the Orthodox, between the Latin and Greek, Rome and Constantinople. Over a number of theological and power issues, the Pope of Rome and the Patriarch of Constantinople excommunicate one another. And 500 years before this, in the 6th century, we have Gregory the Great. He is Pope, who helps clean up the chaos after the fall of the Roman Empire. Gregory the Great protects Christianity by firmly establishing the monastic tradition, which becomes a repository of the learning of the church as Europe falls into the Dark Ages. And go back now another 500 years to the 1st century. In the ministry and mission, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth takes place. And this changes everything. Christianity is born out of Judaism, and the church is born out of the synagogue. Now, this pattern can also be considered as a Judeo-Christian pattern and more. Now, Phyllis doesn't go into this in her book, but I just wanted to point it out. If we go back even another 500 years to the first destruction of the temple in 587 BCE in the Babylonian exile, if you even look at the larger human experience, this is the time of what's known as the axial age, when great spiritual wisdom is revealed across the world. This manifests in the lives of those such as Confucius and Lao Tzu, the Buddha, Zoroaster, Plato, Pythagoras, Heraclitus, and Parmenides. I hope that one is starting to discern this 500-year pattern. Every 500 years, a rummage sale takes place. Perhaps this metaphor seems too demure and modest. Right now, it feels more like a wrecking ball, as Christianity, and more so as society, too goes through a vast transformation. Much is questioned. This brings about a great deal of anxiety and frustration. We are on choppy seas. We wonder if our ship can weather the storm. Will it be torn apart? Can we survive? Will we drown? What will be left? Or more accurately, what needs to change? And will we let it? Now, the reading from Acts tells how Stephen announces a new way coming. The status quo does not like what they hear. They get rid of him, killing the messenger in hopes of getting rid of the message. But divine messages never can be truly silenced. The man who is standing by as the messenger is stoned will eventually be transformed. He becomes one of the most influential Christians in history. His work and writings forever shaped the church. Now hear this part of the reading from Acts today. But filled with the Holy Spirit, Stephen gazed into heaven and saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. "Look," he said, I see the heavens opened and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. But they covered their ears, and with a loud shout all rushed together against him. Then they dragged him out of the city and began to stone him. And the witnesses laid their coats at the feet of a young man named Saul. Saul will begin to persecute this new outgrowth of the sacred way. But one day he too is blinded by the truth and transformed. The divine finds another way of bringing the message. Saul becomes Paul. It is Paul who goes about planting, shaping, and establishing the early church. And our other reading from the Gospel of John can tell us something about this time of emergence. The Message version of today's reading states, Thomas said, "Master, we have no idea where you're going. How do you expect us to know the road?" So the disciples, in other words, Jesus' first followers, want to know more. We do too. We want to know the road, the path, the way. We fear getting lost, especially when everything feels like it's in turmoil and flux. We want a guide. When Tickle wrote her book, The Great Emergence, over a decade ago, in addition to this rummage sale 500-year pattern, she also discerned one commonality that is taking place. At the end of the book, she writes, all share one shining characteristic. They are incarnational. Not only is Jesus of Nazareth incarnate God, but Christian worship must be incarnate as well. Tickle reminds us that Christians are to be grounded in Jesus as the Christ, as God in flesh. We are to follow the way of Jesus, which is one of conscious connection. The reading from John continues. Jesus said, "I am the road, also the truth, also the life. No one gets to the Father apart from me. If you really knew me, you would know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him. You've even seen him." Philip said, "Master, show us the Father, then we'll be content." "You've been with me all this time, Philip, and you still don't understand. To see me is to see the Father. So how can you ask, where is the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words that I speak to you aren't mere words. I don't just make them up on my own. The Father who resides in me crafts each word into a divine act." Philip wants to be shown the divine. We do too. But it has been here all along. The divine is not separate from humanity, but it is to be incarnated and embodied within it. What was unseen and intangible becomes seen and actualized in the Christ. The Christ is what God looks like in human form. The Christ has become and continues to be a symbol of the divine presence. The divine presence continues to attract us. Our egos, in other words, that part of us that says I or me, are drawn to it. The great I am constellates. We are fascinated, captivated, enthralled, and to be honest, a bit terrified. We want to know it. Our outer orientation, in which the world is merely material and casual, shifts. An inner development, an inner process begins to take shape. With experience, work, and maturation, a rise in consciousness may take place. The me of the ego may communicate with and become secondary to the likeness of God that I am. the divine presence and center of the personality. As Jesus reveals this, as he states, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. In other words, I am in the creative divine presence, and the creative divine presence is in me. Now, I realize I am talking about what happens after the metaphorical rummage sale, but this is because I want us to encourage us to take part. Sure, rummage sales are a lot of work, and they can certainly seem overwhelming. They require organization and sorting out of what is important from what is not, but they also can free new space and resources. The result can be transformation. As Americans, as Protestants, as ego-based personalities, we continue to protest and stand against instead of getting involved. Rather than asking what remains and grieving what goes, we may play the blame game, point fingers, or fail to make necessary changes. Let's be honest. Many of us are already fatigued and exhausted, frustrated and fed up. We do not want one more thing to do. But rather than do nothing and get stuck, we need to do the inner work of figuring out what is important and what is not, what stays and what goes, what supports life and what destroys it. So, this day, may we be willing to take part in that metaphorical rummage sale. May we get rid of practices that no longer serve our greater sense of self, our neighbors, and our world. And may we realize if we do adopt that which serves in this way, that we will join in the sacred, and you too will be able to say, I am in the Creator, and the Creator is in me. Amen. Today it's a very windy day out there, so we may be experiencing some technological difficulties again. So hopefully you've been able to find us on our church's website if you aren't finding us presently on Facebook. But I'd like now for us to turn our hearts, our minds, the very center of ourselves to that which has given us life. So let us go there now in prayer. Holy One and living God, we are thankful. We are thankful for this life, despite its frustrations, despite the fact that we are fed up, despite those things that confuse us or bind us. At this time, Holy One, we realize we are in the midst of a pandemic, something that could radically alter our lives, that could kill many, that can harm. But we realize a change has been taking place in our society, in the church, even within ourselves all along. It's not always been pleasant. And those who announce that change sometimes are not met in a very nice way. We heard today in Acts how Stephen was stoned. We also realize that Christ was nailed to a cross, sometimes bringing greater consciousness into the world, having us become more advanced, or becoming more of who we are, sometimes has its own cost. We lift up the prayers of these people now as they may submit them digitally or at least have them within their own hearts. We also turn to you in the silence of ourselves with those things that we just want to share because we are grateful and want to say thank you. But we realize that there is darkness in the world as well as darkness in ourselves. And we would ask that love and light be born there as well. Abba, we know that Jesus called you this, and it's something like Father or Papa. Today in our reading from John, he says, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. In many ways, this means, well, not that we can completely understand it, but that there is a creative and divine presence that is within me, as well as I being within it too. We realize this is not something our minds can fully comprehend, or that our hearts can fully hold. But we are thankful for that presence and that we take part in it as well. Amen. So this day, we want to end our time with you. Kyle will play Let There Be Peace on Earth. And once that's over, I will come back for a benediction. So this day, may you go through that rummage sale. May we find out what is important and what is not. May we be able to free up space because we can let things go that no longer work or are necessary. May we realize what is life-giving from what is death-dealing. May you always have love in your life. May you find joy. May you know peace. And may you be blessed. Amen. I assume we live.